James Hurman, what one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
I'll actually do two things if I can. One, I think, was it took me a long time to learn how to delegate properly, and what I've definitely like in the last 10 years got really good at is kind of trusting others in the right way to do to do a great job, but to do it their way. I think when you particularly when you grow up as like a strategic planner, you're often like a bit of a lone wolf. You kind of go off into your corner and you do your thinking and you talk to consumers and you write your briefs and you do all that kind of stuff. And it can be a really, a really great thing to kind of do largely by yourself. And then when you get into, I think, sort of building companies and building businesses, and I sort of transitioned from being a planner in the ad agency to being more of kind of an entrepreneur. You just can't do it by yourself, right? So you've got to learn to kind of delegate, and that's sometimes hard for people that are really passionate about their craft because they have a really defined view about kind of how to do it, and when you let others do it, sometimes that can be really uncomfortable because they do it differently or they don't quite do it in your eyes as well as you might or whatever. And so I think like learning to delegate and pull great people around me and really trust them and let them go with stuff has been really kind of that's been hugely responsible for kind of the things that I've been able to do over the last 10 years. And the other thing is the power of long-term thinking. I think it's another thing when you're younger, like it's really quite difficult to think far into the future, I think. And as you get older, it does get a bit easier, but I'm kind of really inspired by kind of old wisdom. And if you look at all of the old kind of cultures, they think a lot longer term than we do in kind of the modern Western world. And having sort of a long time term view, understanding that things compound,
Mhm.
and understanding that, as Bill Gates said, we overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year and we underestimate what we can achieve in 10 years. And being able to have a longer term view and go, right, where do I want to be in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years? And what are the things that I can do now to kind of, build up to that place over the long term is, it's hard at first to kind of think in that way, but it's hugely liberating, and it really unlocks an ability to do much bigger things than you could
Mhm.
kind of get away with doing or make happen if you're just focused on how do we make this year great, or what are we going to do next year. So those are probably the two things: delegation and long-term thinking.
On the long term thinking bit, you mentioned about how you are a fan of kind of ancient thinking, or maybe, did you say mysticism? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but
Just
you,
old
you're
cultures,
joining
old wisdoms, old
cultures. Yeah.
old traditions. Yeah.
And you're joining us from New Zealand. Are you referring to, and apologies to every Kiwi for my pronunciation of the word Maori, but are you talking about Maori culture or wider than that as well and into sort of different cultures from across the world?
Yeah, I mean, and you pronounce it pretty well. Maori culture is, of course, sort of our indigenous culture in New Zealand. So that is, a culture and a people that have been around in New Zealand for a much longer time than us kind of immigrants. Um, and I think if you look at Maori culture, you look at Aboriginal culture in Australia, and a much, much older culture. If you look at, I just spent some time in Bhutan with Bhutanese people. If you look at sort of any old wisdom and old culture, they tend to actually, their stories are different, but the principles on which they operate tend to be really similar. So they have a much greater connection to nature and the environment. They think in a much longer term way. They're more collectivist in their thinking. They tend to collectivize value creation and the kind of sharing in value, and they operate more as a community than a bunch of individuals sort of striving for their own individual gain. And what I find really fascinating is like these older cultures, they spent a really, really long time on Earth figuring out how to live well and how to prosper. And I think what we've gone through over the past few hundred years as a Western culture is we've kind of ignored and undone all of that. And we have like no end of kind of like self-help books and happiness books and all of this kind of stuff, and a whole lot of science around it and all the rest of it. In reality, people before us figured all that out ages ago. we can just actually listen to them. And if we do those sorts of things, like, have our connection to nature, think long term, act with kind of kindness and wisdom, and sort of look after one another, and think of ourselves as part of a team or a group or a community, as much or more than just being sort of an individual. Like, those sorts of things are what kind of lead to a good life and happiness and success and all the rest of it. And so I'm just kind of a fan of looking at those old cultures and just shamelessly stealing their principles and applying them, because they really work.
Yeah.
And it's all there for us to take and use.
I think that might just be the lesson and the words the world needs to hear right now, given the political situation in certain countries in different parts of the world. But yeah, we've delegated a lot to the culture of rugged individualism that has generated capitalism, brought a lot of value to a lot of people. But maybe there is more than, as somebody told me, there's no pockets in a shroud. Can't take the money
Yeah.
with you. So
And also, it's compatible with having a good life. But sort of following older traditions and older wisdom does not mean sort of giving up all of the nice things in your life and all the rest of it. I was actually in when I was in Bhutan, and I was talking to some very wise sort of people who are very involved in the old culture in Bhutan, and and one of them was talking about, they said something about owning a Ferrari. And I was like, so in sort of Buddhist tradition, could you not have a Ferrari? And I was being slightly facetious, but they were like, no, you can totally have a Ferrari if you really want one. It's just that if you do whatever it is that you do. Within Buddhism, they talk about compassion and loving kindness being their kind
mhm.
of like what's at the sort of heart of Buddhism. If you drive your Ferrari around with compassion and loving kindness, that's absolutely fine, right? So it's not that we have to give up the things that we enjoy in the modern world at all. It's completely compatible with still having a connection to nature, a connection to one another, thinking about the long term, considering ourselves guardians for the next generation and what we leave behind. All that sort of stuff is totally compatible with still having a nice life and nice things and all the rest of it. So it's not kind of one or the other. And I think it is sort of a really interesting, perhaps, fix for the ills of the modern world if we just kind of did a bit more of looking back and learning from people that have come before us and done a lot of work understanding how to live well, how to take care of our environment, how to be happy. As I say, all of that wisdom is there for the taking. We can all just have it. It's free. It doesn't cost us anything. And it's really good and it really works.
Hey up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I am the host of your show. Thank you for coming along to listen to me today talking to James Hurman. James is down there in New Zealand and he runs Tracksuit. He's an investor, he's a market researcher, he's a creative, he's a teacher, he's an educator. He does a lot. He's also a great person to talk to. So we're going to get into that episode any minute now. Before we do, I just want to tell you about one thing I do in my day job, which is the strategy director for XMO Marketing. I am running a couple of workshops. Just finished one with Seth Godin. You've missed the first one in Belfast, but we've got two more workshops with Seth Godin taking place in Ireland. Friday, the 7th of March, it's going to be in Derry, or Londonderry for some people, and the Walled City Brewery. And on Thursday, the 3rd of April, it's going to be in Dublin at the Guinness Enterprise Centre, not the Guinness Factory, the Enterprise Centre. It's not too far away. Both of them are from 1 till 5, and they cost £265 per person. Seth is going to be beamed in by video link, and he's going to take you through a process to help you create a marketing strategy. I'm going to do a presentation about marketing strategy as well, with lessons from this very podcast. And Aidan and Chris from Horrible Brands are also going to take you through some brand strategy work. A great session, $265 per person, unless, of course, you use my discount code, which will get you a ticket for $225 per person. Have a look at the link in the show notes, and that will give you the discount code, and you'll be able to pick it up from there. Enough of that. Let's get on to today's episode with James Hurman. Off we go. As a podcast host, you there go, right, okay, how am I going to describe James Hurman when he comes on the show? And I looked, you've been a planner, as you said, a strategic planner. You've launched direct-to-consumer toothbrushes. You've had a spirit brand, a non-alcoholic cocktail brand, which we absolutely will be talking about shortly. You've got agency, you do training, you've got a SaaS brand, you've got a newsletter, you're an author. You're a pain in the ass for a podcast host, is what you are, James. So how do you describe what you do for work?
Yeah, it's challenging. Whenever someone introduces me, I sort of feel a bit exhausted by the end of it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, like, again, growing up in agency land, I think one thing that people that work in agencies really thrive on is the diversity of stuff that you get to get involved with, right? So normally, unless you're working in an element of luxury, you're working across lots of clients with lots of different sorts of problems, lots of different types of businesses to learn about,
Mhm.
and and I think. A lot of people in advertising really thrive on that diversity. And so that's something that I've sort of taken into my kind of post agency life. Just that desire to kind of work on lots of different stuff and do lots of different things and enjoy that diversity of kind of stuff. And so yeah, I kind of, fundamentally I'm about strategy and creativity and innovation and those sorts of things. And in the business that I created 10 years ago, we're kind of part venture studio, part venture capital firm, part design firm, part brand agency. We do a bunch of stuff, but the company's called previously unavailable. We love new things that didn't exist before. So we're generally helping to apply strategy and creativity to companies that are inventing or reinventing. And yeah, we love just creating new things and bringing them into the world in a way that helps them succeed.
I want to start by talking about your non-alcoholic cocktails,
Right.
the brand you have of that, because that's something new. So by the looks of it, you've got an agency and you've decided, you know what, I'm going to practice what I preach here, and you've seen a gap in the market. So what was the process from the sort of insight? What was the insight that you saw? You didn't just think, I fancy investing some money here. How did that
Mm.
come? How did the brand come about? Because as I was doing the research for this, you've obviously got a little bit of a big name partnership going on at the minute in the US. So tell us how it started first before we get into the big name partnership.
Sure. I mean, like you were just saying before we press record, you started your podcast in the lockdown. We started AF Drinks, actually a bunch of stuff in the lockdown. I think it was kind of for some people it was a really productive time, right? We got bored and we started new things, and it was actually a friend of mine, Lisa King, who's the founder and CEO of AF Drinks, and she had come out of a really successful venture that she had run for the past few years. She had given up drinking and said, you know what, there's very little. This was back in 2021. There's very little to drink that's any good when you're not drinking. And at the same time, it was the year that I'd taken a year off drinking alcohol as well, so I was not drinking. And another friend of mine, Nick Worthington, who was my creative partner in my advertising days, he had also stopped drinking for a completely different reason. And so Lisa kind of brought us all together and said, why don't we try and do something about this? So she started making making beverages, and they were really quite good. And so Nick and I sort of came on and thought, right, well, how do we, what's the brand we wrap around this? What's the kind of, creative idea at the heart of this company? And we named it AF, which stands for alcohol free and also for as fuck. And so that was kind of like, having a bit of fun with I guess the name of the category. And then just set out to create a brand that wasn't about, you shouldn't drink alcohol, or these are the reasons alcohol is bad for you and all the rest of it. We really set out to create something that was, as good as a product and a brand as a booze brand, right? So
Yeah.
it would be as much fun as a booze brand. And the liquid, we have, the liquid is, I didn't have anything to do with the liquid. So this isn't a brag, but the liquid is very, very good.
You must have been on the sampling team for that,
Yes.
right?
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely. We all did a lot of tasting, but the liquid's great. We use this really interesting kind of secret extract that we call Afterglow, which gives you a kind of a warmth on the palate as you drink. So it's more of the experience of the physiological experience of drinking a cocktail. And yeah, it's gone so great. So we quickly grew to market share leadership in New Zealand, and since then have really been focused mainly on the US and are now in thousands of retailers across the US, and it's going pretty well.
I've worked with a lot of alcohol brands, never with an alcohol-free brand, but a lot of alcohol brands, including some new brands. And one of the big things where they tend to live or die, yes, the brand looks great and everything looks great, but they don't have distribution. Getting physical availability, as some might call it, might
Yeah,
be, a huge challenge.
yeah.
You seem to have. I'm not going to say you've bypassed that challenge, but you've aced it. You've kind of got physical availability in New Zealand initially, did it then go to Australia and then into the States, and everybody wants to get into the States, and it's a really tough market to crack. So how did you go about doing that? Was it all built on the great brand?
When I think of brand, nothing's just because of the brand. Brand is an amazing way of amplifying the value of the fundamentals of a business. And so as much as the brand plays a really important role in the success of AF, it's also the quality of the liquid is really important, right? The pricing the is really important. As you say, the retailer and distribution relationships that we've got are really important. Certainly attracting retailers. They're looking for a few different things. Of course, they're looking for a great product. Of course, they love a great brand, but they're also looking at what's the growth in the category, what's the opportunity here from a retailer's perspective, and our point of view back in 2021 when this category was very, very nascent. There weren't a lot of options. Was that this could be a really meaningful category in supermarkets, non-alcoholic beverages, whether that's alcohol-free beer or it's alcohol-free wines or spirits or cocktails. We just had a clear belief that more and more people were going to not necessarily stop drinking completely, but want to balance out their drinking with a bit of kind of time that's a bit more sober. So we had a really clear view on that, and so it was about, for us, communicating that view and that opportunity to retailers, and exciting them about that, and positioning ourselves as a really good sort of first move to get into that category, and also kind of working to build the category. When you're one of the first or the first in a new category, your job is not just to kind of build your own kind of product and brand; it's to build the category. And so we did a lot of the work that we did was about making, we talk about making not drinking cool as fuck. That's our kind of that's our mission, our AF mission. And so we did a lot of work to make sure that not when we showed not drinking or drinking AF products, it looked just as kind of fun as drinking alcoholic beverages. It wasn't an option for pregnant people and boring teetotalers and all that kind of stuff. It was very much a brand for drinkers, who occasionally didn't want to drink, and so we just we kind of did that to grow the category and try and bring in a whole new generation of people by not making them feel bad about drinking, but making them go, wow, I want to be part of that party.
And
And so
which brings us neatly then to your. I don't know if it's just an influencer collaboration, if it's a brand partnership, if it's just an advertisement. Look, I'm not going to spoil this. You talk about who's promoting the brand in the States, well, worldwide. Go on.
Yeah, so we did a little Kardashian piece with Chloe and with Kris Jenner, and
I mean, you've
it
completely lowballed and understated that. A little, with the biggest person on social media in the world at the moment. Yeah. So sorry. So go on. Just give us that one more time. Give us that one more.
yeah. It was, when we were starting the company, I had this insight that, and it was from my own experience of not drinking. Like when I found out that, Pharrell Williams didn't drink. I don't know whether these people have started drinking yet, by the way, but at the time, like Pharrell Williams didn't drink, Tyler the Creator didn't drink, Sarah Silverman, who else? Like Bradley Cooper, a whole bunch of people that you kind of go, wow, these are kind of awesome, cool, sociable, fun, awesome people. And when I learned that they weren't drinking, that somehow made me feel like, oh wow, I'm kind of part of like a cool group. Again, I'm not part of the group of people that are sort of boring and staying off alcohol for health reasons and all that kind of stuff. Like there's actually this movement of really kind of incredible people doing amazing things who are sort of using a different relationship of alcohol to help them achieve those amazing things. So our sort of thesis very early on was the more we can do to show people, uh, people that others look up to and think are cool, and kind of, the more that we can show those people enjoying the product or taking a break from alcohol or whatever, the more that people will get into, this idea that not drinking can be just as cool as drinking. So yeah, the piece we did earlier in the year was just part of kind of that long term strategy, really. Like, how do we connect with these people that that do either like to take a break from drinking every now and then, or don't drink at all, and how do we kind of use them to show that that the brand and the product is just as fun as drinking. So yeah, we did that partnership through a partner of ours in New York who arranges those sorts of things, and so they helped us get to those people, and yeah, it's super cool. It's really amazing to see your brand like in the hands of Chloe and Chris, and they're having fun with the product, and yeah, it was really that was really buzzy, and it's done great things for the business.
So the two questions people listening to this are screaming at their phones right now, and I'm only going to ask one of them because I'm not going to ask it. The first one is, how much did you pay them for it? And I'm not going to ask you that. But the second one is, as a creative brand strategist, did you delegate? Because the creative, the video, and there's a link in the show notes, so just click on, go and have a watch of it. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. Did you delegate that? And if so, how difficult was it to sort of sit on your hands where you're going like, this is the biggest thing in in social land. How come I'm not getting involved?
It was our sort of our creative partners
Yeah.
that really pulled that off. So I can claim no responsibility for how well that turned out, I'm afraid. But
And was that easy
um,
for you to do? You mentioned about the delegating thing at the beginning, but was it easy to go, do you know what, I'm comfortable. This is, like let them do their
yeah,
thing.
totally. I mean, I think
Brilliant.
like, me personally, I don't have like a ton of experience dealing directly with massive celebrities and sort of how to interface with them and how to kind of, make the most of them and do things in a way that really works. And so yeah, when it comes to anything like that, I am more than happy to bring in great partners who know what they're doing and can, pull something off that frankly I'd probably mess up.
Mhm. Brilliant. No, look, it is. I urge you to go and have a look at that link. And if you're in, are you in the UK yet? I don't think you are you?
We are. We will be.
You will be,
I
right?
shouldn't
Oh,
say
you
too
heard it
much
here
more.
first.
Yes, yes, we will be.
Excellent. So if you're in the US, if you're in New Zealand and Australia, have a look at the video. Go and buy some AF, right? Because it does. You watch the video and you're like, I want this. This is great. So go and have a look.
Yeah, it's really good, and I kind of like without a shadow of a lie. I know everyone's had rubbish tasting non-alcoholic cocktails
Hell
or
yes.
substitutes. Like there are lots of bad ones, and probably everyone listening has had an experience that's pretty average. So
Hmm.
do give AF the brand's called Free AF. Now that's sort of what's on the can, and give it a go, and I promise you will be pleasantly surprised.
Excellent. So from AF or free AF into Tracksuit, which from a business fundamentals perspective couldn't be any more different. Tracksuit is a SaaS product, a brand tracking platform. Would that be you've probably got a pithier description of it, but it's a brand tracking product that runs as a SaaS business.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we describe it as beautiful, affordable, always-on brand tracking, and so really the genesis of that business was being concerned about the prevalence of short-term performance metrics, and the lack of ability for any small company to track their long-term brand health metrics.
Hmm.
So, I was looking at companies in our portfolio in New Zealand and companies that we invest in, and sort of startups down here, and seeing that they had all of this sort of short-term information, and we're really over-indexing on performance marketing and not really doing a lot of work building their brand and setting themselves up in a way to grow sustainably into the long term. And one of the reasons for that is we measure what we manage, right? And if you've got tons of short-term data in front of you and you've got no long-term data in front of you, you manage to that short-term data, and it's natural that we kind of funnel all of our efforts and resource and money into the short term because we can measure it. If you want to measure the long term, if you want to measure, how you're growing your brand in the market, how many of those people that are going to come into the category next month or next year are aware of you and familiar with you, which means they'll be more likely to buy you when they do come into the category. You've got to track things like your brand awareness. What percentage of the market has heard about your brand, is familiar with you? And at the time, that was just out of the question, too expensive for any small company. Like, to do a good brand tracker, you're paying like, I don't know, like $100,000 a year or something, something like that, the traditional way. And so we were just like, well, we've got to figure out a way of making this vastly less expensive if we want smaller, younger companies to have the data in front of them of their long-term performance, so they start managing to that and start growing. And this sort of came out of a lot of work understanding how startup brands grow. Like often they have, a great first 2 or 3 years, grow really, really quickly, and then find they plateau and their performance marketing stops working as well. Their cost of acquisition goes up, their ROI goes down. They freak out, wonder what on earth's happening. Why can't I find new customers? The reason that happens is that, you exhaust all of your kind of early adopter customers, the people that will buy you even though you're not very familiar to them. And you haven't done that work of building your familiarity with the mass market, which is that next phase of growth that you're going to need to go to. And if you haven't sort of built your brand and built the familiarity of you among that kind of much larger group of mainstream customers who actually need to be familiar with a brand before they buy it, if you don't do that job, you're going to hit that plateau and you're going to have a great sort of launch and takeoff, and then you're going to hit the skids at some point and not continue growing, and everything's going to sort of go a little bit dark. And so it was really about that. So we figured out a way of making brand tracking just as kind of robust from a research point of view, but about 1/10 of the normal cost, and took that to market again, kind of during lockdown, during COVID.
You had a busy lockdown, James. A busy
Yeah,
lockdown.
really.
Didn't you just
Yeah,
watch
really.
Netflix like everybody else?
I did watch some Netflix, yeah, but yeah, no, I kind of got restless, got busy, and anyway, yeah, Tracksuit's gone great. We're now like I think there's about 120 people on the team across New Zealand, Australia, US, UK, and we're operational across all of those markets, and yeah, we've grown. We now track thousands of brands around the world. It's been one of the fastest growing startups ever out of New Zealand, and so it really just hit a nerve and filled a need. It's probably no great surprise to anyone that you take something that's really valuable and you make it 1/10 of the cost, and people tend to like that, right?
Maybe the amateur question. It's supposed to be a professional podcast, but maybe it's an amateur question. The brand Tracksuit, the name, sorry, not the brand, the name Tracksuit concerns me in all of this. It's such a generic word, and I think the URL is used. It's not just tracksuit.com because that's gone somewhere else. And it's
We
such a
actually do
generic
now
term.
have tracksuit.com, but we had to
Oh,
start
you've
with
not
gotracksuit.com.
go Tracksuit. So you talked about the power of building branding, getting you made it sound it's not easy, but your first 10 customers, your first 50 customers, and then you've exhausted all those. Then you've got to get up to that. A name like Tracksuit is relatively generic and means lots of things to lots of people. Search traffic, being found, all that sort of stuff. What was the thing? How did you get there to Tracksuit? How did the brand come about?
Yeah, so with both AF and Tracksuit and lots of other things that I've been involved with, like what I really kind of like, what I love in a name is a name that kind of makes you smile from the outset, right? And so brand building is, it's really a lot about building an emotional connection with an audience. And so when I name companies, I'm not looking for a really sort of dry, rational, functional descriptor of what the company does. And I'm not really thinking about things like, SEO and how trademarkable or whether the URL is available or those sorts of things. I'm trying to look for something that is related to the product and the category, but also has a sense of fun. And everyone kind of tracksuits are sort of funny, right? And tracksuit. I mean, it doesn't make if you analyze it, it doesn't make complete logical sense. Like tracksuit's about brand tracking, but it's not really a suit. And, you can sort of analyze it in that way if you
Yeah.
want to. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Tracksuit makes people smile. When we show up at events in tracksuits, it makes people smile. When I'm on stage presenting as in my role as a kind of a, I guess, kind of expert for tracksuit, I wear a tracksuit on stage, and it makes people smile. And that all sounds very simple and superficial, but it's actually been one of the things which has really helped the company grow. People just really enjoy the name. It speaks to the culture. Tracksuit is, we started in, market research has not necessarily been like the coolest end of marketing and advertising, right? But we've made brand tracking something which is really fun and has tons of personality, and it's a beautiful experience, and the UI design is awesome, and like all that kind of stuff. Like I think one of the things I love doing is going into categories where there aren't already great brands, or the marketing hasn't been done as well as it's been done in sneakers or soft drinks or beer or whatever, and applying those kind of strategic and creative principles to bring delight into that category and make it feel fun and cool and attract people towards it. And naming is a big part of that. So AF is a cheeky name. It speaks to alcohol free, but it's it speaks to the AF meme. We can have a lot of fun with it. Tracksuit, again, it sort of speaks to tracking, but we can have a lot of fun with it, showing up in tracksuits and doing all that kind of stuff. And so yeah, that's how I think about naming, in a less sort of functional, rational way, and more of a like, how are we going to give this company a name that makes people smile, and kind of draws people toward us.
You wrote recently in Marketing Week about the power of emotion in brand building, and I think particularly in a B2B context, because good God, nowhere gets it quite as wrong as B2B. And you talked in there about the cost of doing nothing. I think something in the article maybe about the cost of inertia. Is it we're going to have to spend this money to do it, and it'll cost X, and what if, and what if we don't work? But the cost of inertia, what's the cost of doing nothing? I love that, and in fact, I was even talking about it with a client today. So can you just sort of pull that apart a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things in there. I mean, one thing I'll talk to is B2B and how we, for some reason we kind of sense that B2B is a really different exercise to B2C marketing. And I remember years ago working on the Vodafone business here in New Zealand, and they were a consumer telco, of course, and also a business telco. So they had a whole B2B business and sales team, and they wanted to be a kind of reputable provider to the businesses of New Zealand. And I remember them, they really freaked out. The business side of Vodafone really freaked out when the consumer side would do fun marketing, because they felt like this will make business people think we're not a serious brand. And that was a really pervasive belief within Vodafone, that actually when they did like fun things or outrageous things or emotional things on the consumer side, it negatively impacted the business side of the B2B side of the business. Now, I did an exercise with them where I went through the brand tracking on Vodafone and showed them what happened when they did like a big fun consumer ad. Their business brand metrics went up, not down. Right. So even though people strongly believed, because this was just the way they thought things worked, they believed that doing fun, emotional stuff negatively impacted a B2B sales process. It did not at all. And we've since, because that was way back in like 2007 or something, but we've since got so much marketing science and effectiveness research that shows that B2B decisions are made just the same as B2C decisions. Yes, there's a procurement process, but when you analyze that process, you find that the emotional connection to the brand and the familiarity with the brand are critical in B2B brand growth.
There's a confusion, isn't there, between having a rational process, which B2B almost always has.
Yeah.
People then assume that that makes the decision a rational decision, which it's not.
Yeah.
Just because
Yeah.
it's not an impulse purchase does not mean that there isn't impulse in the people buying it.
Totally. Yeah, that's totally right. And like, and there is just mountains of evidence to that effect, and no evidence that taking a super rational approach like grows business brands. It doesn't. Like, there's no evidence for that. You may think that that's the truth, but it's not. And so for anyone who doesn't believe me, I would encourage you to look at resources like the LinkedIn B2B Institute, who have done a lot of work in B2B marketing effectiveness. And it's all free if you search B2B Institute at LinkedIn. And just there's mountains of research about it. And the cost of not doing that is that you get left behind by the businesses that are doing that. I mean, what we've found in our B2B businesses, we approach them in the same way as we approach the B2C businesses. We try and create fun brands and do, marketing that forges an emotional connection. And I promise you, it really works. Like with the two B2B SaaS businesses, we've created something like $400 million of enterprise value over the past 4 years. And that's been going into categories like market research, where there hasn't been a lot of emotion, a lot of fun, and making it emotional and cool. And we are cleaning up. And so, I've got the marketing science, I've got the experience from my past, and I've got the investment
stack of dollars in the bank account.
Yeah.
But while we're being crass and talking about dollars, before we move on from talking SaaS, I want to just talk about your Brand Fund 1 and recently launched Brand Fund 2. It would strike me, I've met a lot of people who've sort of come from agency life and maybe started their own products and gone into teaching or learning and newsletters. Almost everything you've got on your CV. I've met lots of people who've done, to a greater or lesser extent, but I've met a lot of people who've done that. But you've also launched an investment fund as well, which I don't think I've met anyone else who's done that. So what was the rationale behind it? Are you an investor anyway? Was this just like a punt? How did you get there? And tell us about the funds as well.
Yeah, so yeah, that's right. We launched our first venture capital fund in 2023, I believe, Brand Fund 1. And it's just a small fund. It's not a huge VC fund. We raised about $4.5 million, something like that. So just a very small first fund to start to learn how to invest well and run a fund before we got sort of too big. The second fund will be between 10 and 15 million. So that's we'll move up from here. How it came about was we actually did a lot of work between about 2019 and 2023, where we invested in a bunch of startup companies by trading our services for equity. So we didn't start with lots of money to invest, but we did start with lots of skills and time and that sort of stuff, which we invested into. At the time, about 10 startups. And when we look at that portfolio, it performed very, very well. So one of the leading venture capital firms here in New Zealand called Icehouse Ventures, they were pretty close to us. They were watching what we were doing, and they said, "Hey, this group of companies you've invested in is doing really, really well. Like if it were a fund in our business, it would be a really good fund. And we don't quite understand how you're doing that because you're not experienced, fund managers. So how are you doing this?" And the thing that we have always done, just naturally as kind of a creative company, is really bring great brand thinking to the companies that we were working with. So, all of those companies that were in our portfolio, we'd applied really strong brand and creative thinking to, and that had helped them perform really well. And so Icehouse Ventures sort of said to us, well, we'd like, you operate a different thesis. What I mean by that is we think about investment in a slightly different way to how traditional VC companies do. We look for companies where brand is going to make a big difference between a good exit and a great exit. We look for companies that we believe can be the best global brands of tomorrow, where brand marketing is wanted within the organization and can make a real difference. And we kind of partner with and invest in those companies and really help them build great brands. So anyway, we created Brand Fund One with that thesis. So it's a brand focused venture capital fund, both B2B and B2C, and we're looking for companies where brand will make a difference between them being a good performer and a great performer. And so we started the fund with that thesis. We set out to raise 2 mil, ended up raising 4.5. The market responded pretty well to the offer and the thesis, and we've since deployed that fund into about 10 different companies, all and that fund has performed. It's early days, but it's performed very, very well. And we'll take that same thesis into the next fund, a slightly bigger fund, which will enable us to follow on and make further investments into the companies that we invested into in Brand Fund One, and also welcome a whole bunch of new companies to the mix. And so it's great. Being an investor is really, it really sharpens the mind in terms of really understanding a business and its potential, and being able to apply brand and creative thinking in a way that is really, really in sync with the commercial strategy, the investment thesis, how this company's going to grow. And the more I get into it, the more I learn that everything's sort of interrelated, and it's not just brand that's going to make a company great, it's all the other fundamentals. But if you understand all of those fundamentals, you understand the commercial realities of the business and the category and all that kind of stuff, it enables you to do a better job with the brand. You can understand how to make sure that the brand is really supporting all of those things in just the right way.
My one question on this, which is designed to catch you out, so I'm giving you fair warning here. Everything you said about Tracksuit and AF and brands that make people smile, how did you end up naming it Brand Fund 1 and Brand Fund 2, which sounds like it's right out of Soviet Russia? Was that taken out of your hands and the finance guys are like, this is what we're going to partner on this, but only if you take our name on it? How did Brand Fund 1 come about?
I think, look, when as much as I said about emotion and having fun being critical in the B2B business world, it is a slightly higher stakes game when you're asking people to part with significant amounts of money and trust you as a manager of that money. And it's not that we don't want to have fun with it, but it's just we're already like previously unavailable, and the sorts of things we do are already very fun and very creative, right? So investors sort of understand that about us. What we actually needed to do with our investment funds was present a case for being good, sensible, money managers, and part of that was just having a pretty straightforward name, which spoke to the thesis of the fund. And one day I think we probably will earn the right to kind of give our funds kind of wild names. But I think we just wanted to be very clear with the market that this is a different type of thesis for an investment fund. This is what it's about. It's about brand, and sort of educate the market on the importance of that and the ability for better brand thinking to deliver outsized gains on their investments. So it's probably the most boring name I've ever given anything.
It's fine. It does what it says, and it's working. That's the important thing. So I'll come back to something you've talked about a couple of times throughout the episode about marketing science. And you've talked a lot, and you've written a lot about Binet Field's work in the past, and the long and the short of it, and things like that. And you've also written about the other great bit of work, sort of how brands grow, and the work coming out of Ehrenberg Bass in South Australia. I was going to say not too far from you, but it's about 10,000 miles from where you are. It's a big place. So first of all, you've, and I mean this lovingly, been in the industry a while. What impact did the long and the short of it have on brand thinking when it first came out?
Um, enormous impact, and it has had enormous impact ever since 2013 when it was published. Um, and I think what Peter and Les managed to do was create a set of kind of metrics or a set of data that could show the difference between the effects of what we do to drive sales in the short term and the effects of what we do to build brand in the long term, and really study the commercial effects of those. And that was from the IPA creating their data bank, which now goes back decades and has thousands of cases in it, and alongside the IPA entries, when you enter, you fill out a survey which gives them all of that data on the kind of all the variables of the campaign and its commercial performance over both the short and the long term. So they really did an amazing job of creating this resource that then Peter and Les were able to sort of look at and analyze. That enabled us a new view into a new look into how marketing and advertising work. And so that is a really kind of amazingly seminal piece of work. And yeah, it's had an enormous impact on the industry. I think, what's frustrating to all of us is, even though that work has been around for so long, is how businesses still have a really hard time applying the wisdom from the long and the short of it. Most still don't follow those principles, and as a result, most are seeing, poorer short and long term performance than they could be if they just followed what the research says and has proven they should do to drive the best growth and performance.
Does that come back to maybe a little bit about what you touched on at the beginning about how we've kind of thrown out ancient thinking and been obsessed with this kind of modern culture of individualism? But
Yeah,
we're obsessed with. I actually saw um, another podcast, the Uncensored CMO, where they were talking about this. Like brands aren't built in quarters, but businesses are measured in quarters, and we
totally.
because of this sort of contradiction in how things are looked at, even though it makes sense when you read it, it's actually hard to implement that in an organization that's built around a quarterly reporting rhythm, monthly sales numbers, weekly sales numbers, daily trading figures. It can be
Yeah.
difficult to put those two things together, can't it?
It's really hard because we've set we've fucked everything up by setting our world up in a very short term way. So we work in financial years, and we report in quarters, and we have a cycle of employment that means that not just CMOs but everyone is in their job for usually kind of a short amount of time. Maybe you're there a couple of years and you go on and do something else, and so the world is really structured in a way that encourages us to to think very short term, and so I kind of really understand why marketers find it difficult when they've got the business bearing down on them, saying the only thing that matters is getting to the result at the end of this year, so that we can report a good result to our shareholders, and we can make a good dividend, and we can all get our bonuses and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really systemic issue. Even though the science, the effectiveness research is unequivocal that you will have a better job over you will have a better company over 5 or 10 years, a better investment return, a better exit if that's what you're going for, a better IPO,
Mm-hmm.
a better shareholder result over the long term if you think and act in a more long term way, and do the things this year that are going to make next year and the year after really great, even though they might not produce as big a short term result as the other things that you do. But it's really it's one of those problems that's almost intractable. But
Mm-hmm.
there are. I love it when I find companies, and there's one here in New Zealand called Turners, which is like essentially a used car business. So it's nothing fancy, but they are the darling of the share market here in New Zealand. They've had incredible growth in terms of market share, sales growth, profitability, shareholder growth, share price growth. They've been the real darling, and it's largely because their head of marketing is has taken all of this marketing science and effectiveness research and just applied it wholesale to the business, and they've been the outstanding success in New Zealand. From it doesn't matter which way you look at it. If you're an investor, if you're a stock market professional, if you're a marketer, it doesn't matter. You look at that business and it is flying. And so, there's when people do apply these principles, they really, really, really work. But it's very hard to apply them because you've got to get buy-in from the people around you. That, hey, why don't we try and what if we tried to make 2028 great, right? This year. What if we tried to do that, right? Let's keep the lights on this year for sure. We got to do that. Mm-hmm. But what if we made 2028 amazing? What if we're the biggest in our market? What if we're making more money than anyone? We're absolutely creaming it in 2028. What should we do now to make that the case? And I think that's a good question to ask, but it's a very hard one for most people to ask.
So my great mentor in my 20s, he's now dead, a guy called Nevin, beat into me 2 words, which will stick with me till the day I die: question everything. And so, I never look at anything without thinking about that, going, yeah, but what's the angle on this and where did it come from? And I'm not trying to pretend these are my questions, but over the years since Long and Short of It was released, a number of people have maybe questioned the width of the market. You're picking up case studies of people who've won, so it's already self-selected to be the top couple of percentage, not the widest database that they've they've gone into. Is it really, is 60-40 actually as hard and fast as you mean? Because if you look at the data points slightly differently, it might be 70-30 or 50-50 and all that, and there's been a lot of criticism. I think what I would say is there's been criticism of it, and I think what we might have been in a better place if there'd have been critique of it rather than criticism. That's probably the point I'm trying to get across. But it has been kind of pulled apart by a number of people. Does that, in your view, make it any less useful, any less relevant here now in 2025?
It would do if the findings weren't supported in other data sets that had nothing to do with advertising effectiveness awards. So let's start with the data set of the IPA. So yes, it is a group of effectiveness award winning or at least entered campaigns. Mm-hmm. So it's totally fair to go, hang on, isn't that a really weird data set? Like that represents a microscopic group of outliers in advertising, and is that really valid? Like if we study that, is that really telling us anything about how marketing and advertising work for, I don't know, normal companies, or the other 99% of the time that doesn't get entered into those advertising awards? And I think intellectually, it's fair to ask that question, right? It does seem like it's an unusual data set. Where that logic starts to break down, if you look at the core principles that have been derived from the long and short of it. So if you look at things like, emotional campaigning works harder over the long term than rational campaigning. If you go to other data sets, so if you go to Kantar's data set, if you go to Grace Kai and Magic Numbers, they're in the UK, who have a big data set of normal advertising, not awards entered or won or anything like that, just lots and lots of data in their econometric models from normal brands doing everyday stuff. They find the same principles, right? They can show you exactly the same stuff. When we spread out across more media, we get more commercial results. When we run campaigns for longer, we see bigger compounding effects from that. So if it was true that it's an unusual data set which would necessarily produce unusual and not valid results, we wouldn't see exactly the same outcomes in all the other data sets. And so, it's true of Kantar and Magic Numbers. It's true of Ehrenberg Bass. So Ehrenberg Bass have spent, a long time as the institute, and before that, Frank Bass and Andrew Ehrenberg doing all of the work that sort of led to the formation of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And again, the principles that they find are exactly what we see in the IPA databank. So I'll give you some examples. Advertising is much better at causing penetration gains than it is at driving loyalty, right? And we know that from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, they've done an awful lot of work around, the loyalty dynamics and how difficult it is to shift loyalty metrics with things like advertising. In the long and the short of it, you can see very clearly that the campaigns that went after loyalty metrics to drive loyalty were much less effective than the campaigns that went after penetration gain. Um, mental availability and physical availability in the Ehrenberg Bass language. That's about, us as to grow a brand, you need to do two things well. One, you need to build the brand up in the minds of all of the people that are going to buy the brand now, but importantly in the future, who aren't in the category today. And physical availability, you've got to make the thing easy to understand and buy and get your hands on when you want it. The long and the short of it is just the same thing. We need to build a brand over the long term, build up the familiarity of that brand in the minds of current and future buyers, and we need to, for the short term, we need to make things easy to buy. And short-term advertising works much better when it's pretty informational. It's closer to the point of purchase. It's talking to people who are in the market right now and making it easier for them to buy those things. So when you look at the outcomes of all of the work from the IPA data bank, they are replicated in all of the other data sets which have nothing to do with awards. So that's how we know that actually the findings are, they are completely valid. If they were invalid, they wouldn't be the same things that we learn in all those other data sets.
And there is, as you said, similarities in everything that's coming out. And I think the great thing that I've noticed, first marketing job was 22, 23 years ago now. Oh, dear God. Yeah, a few years ago now. The debates back then would have been, marketing's just it's more of an art, isn't it? It's just about, talking to the right people and hopefully you'll get the right creative that will end up whatever. I think that's definitely tipped more into the science element, hasn't it? If you know what the recipe is to follow, you can at least have a good stab at it. That doesn't mean you're going to guarantee success every time. I can follow a recipe and still mess up baking a cake. I can do that better than most. But hopefully, if you follow the recipe, you've got a good chance of getting there. That's what I think, despite the arguments and debates between some of the people in the industry about who's right and whose data set's right. I think broadly the train's heading in the right direction, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, when you and I started, there was a bunch of Ehrenberg Bass stuff that was hidden away in journals that no one ever read, frankly. And there was, just aside from that, there was some other academic study around marketing, but there really wasn't anywhere near like what we've created in the past sort of 15, 20 years, where there is such a strong base of understanding, which has been the result, of a few things, the great work the Ehrenberg Bass Institute have done, the great work that Les and Peter and the IPA have done, but also an increasing amount of data to study, right? And so the internet and the availability of data has made it a lot easier to kind of to study these things. And it is still, I wouldn't say it's a complete science. You can't create a formula for great advertising. It's very difficult to do that, or at least not a strict formula, because part of advertising and marketing is originality, right? Is finding new, fresh ways to meet the consumer. And so if you keep doing exactly the same thing over and over again, it'll stop working. So this is why we, still creativity, the ability to create new, engaging ideas and concepts that attract the consumer. That's still a creative act, right? It's still kind of doing new things and not following a strict recipe. But underneath that, there are a bunch of variables that give us an effectiveness advantage. What I mean by that is they don't necessarily guarantee effectiveness, but what we know is if for example, your share of voice is above your share of market, we know that that's more likely to make you grow than the other way around. If your share of voice is lower than your share of market, it's more likely to make your brand decline in terms of its market share. So the right amount of spend gives us an effectiveness advantage. Focusing our advertising on penetration gains rather than on trying to move loyalty metrics is another thing that gives us an effectiveness advantage. Targeting broadly as opposed to micro kind of targeting gives us an effectiveness advantage. Using creative creativity gives us an effectiveness advantage. All of these things give us are likely to make our efforts more commercially successful. And there's still, as you say, you can still get it wrong. You can spend enough money, but do a rubbish campaign that doesn't work very well, and you can still muck it up. But we've got a pretty good recipe now for the type of advertising that delivers results in the short term, causes lots of immediate sales, and the totally different type of marketing and advertising which builds the brand over the long term and drives sustainable long-term compounding growth.
Superb. Love it. I was thinking as you were saying that, how am I going to clip this into something for social media? I'm not. I think I'm just going to put the whole thing on social media and let people listen to that whole answer in one go, because that's what they need to hear. That is the message people need to hear. I've got just two more questions for you, James. I mean, I could keep going for another hour, but I've got two questions. And I think the first question is probably going to be the toughest. What are you most proud of all the things you've done in your career? What are you most proud of?
Yeah, weirdly, I'll go off career, and I'll say my relationship with my wife is the thing that I'm most proud of. And I think it doesn't matter what you do or what you're trying to do. I think having really, and this is something again which goes back to old wisdom, and something that we're not particularly, I don't know, disciplined around these days, is making the relationships in your life really good ones, right? If you've got a really strong kind of social safety net around you, you've got a great relationship with your wife and your family, or your partner and your family, you've got a great relationship with the people that you work with, you've got a great relationship with friends that you've had for a long time, those sorts of things, like that provides a kind of an underpinning and a foundation which enables you to do everything else really, really well. And we're in a bit of a loneliness epidemic at the moment, right? A lot of people don't have those really strong social connections that underpin their happiness and well-being, and ability to kind of make a difference in what they do for work, or whatever it might be. And so I think that's the thing that I tend to focus on a lot. I think we've as a culture, we've put a lot of emphasis on eating well and exercising a lot. And I'm not saying that those aren't good things to do. Of course they are. But actually, you can track the amount of people eating well and the amount of people exercising all the time, and cross that against, the decline in mental health, right? And I'm not saying that they precipitated that decline, because of course they didn't. It's just that, getting to kind of happiness and high performance as a person isn't just about going to the gym and eating well and all that kind of stuff. There's a big part of it, which is having the strong social connections around you, not through social media, but through actually kind of, having great relationships in life. And again, you go back to the science, and it's you show the happiest, longest living people are people that have that really strong kind of social safety net. So I think that's a really important thing for people to kind of worry about before they go worrying about how well they're doing at work. But at work, I think the thing that I'm most proud of is probably the way that we've collectivized value creation and the distribution of that value in our business. So in my business, we have tons of investments. Those are put into a vehicle we call Avail, which is collectively shared by everyone that works in the company. And so we've actually created a company where everyone knows that the work and the creativity that they put into what they do, if that works and that goes really well, they get a big benefit from that. We're not a kind of classic profit dividends to shareholders at the end of the year company. We're doing everything for the long term and putting all of that value creation into a pool for everyone that everyone shares in. And so I'm really proud about that. We had a big event early about a year ago now, where we distributed a lot of money to our people, which came out of one particular deal that we did, and that was kind of life changing for a lot of people. And so I think I just love that, because I know that if you can get a group of people that are really really know that they are part of a team, and everything that they do and every effort that they make is going towards the greater good that they're going to benefit directly from. You create kind of a group of people that's capable of doing things that other groups just aren't capable of. And so, yeah, I'm proud of that.
This is dangerous thinking. People are going to be sat there throwing headphones across the room and going, no, 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 don't let anybody listen to that. I absolutely love it. Love that, James. Thank you very much.
Yeah. For those people that are thinking that way, like, there is a mercenary side to it where, in my mind, I know that I will personally do better over the long term by doing it that way than if I tried to do it the traditional way and just took money out as the shareholder of the business along the way.
Yeah.
I promise you, I will be personally better off, but lots of other people will be too.
People will be. And you recruit better people and they stay for longer and do better work, and fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Right. Well, my last question is easy on the back of that. So thank you. What recommendation would you give to anyone else? A podcast, a book, or whatever? Maybe you've given it away already in terms of long and the short of it, but what would you say to people? Here's one thing I think you should go and check out after listening to this episode.
I'm terrible at giving you marketing books and marketing podcasts and business stuff to read. I tend to read. I tend to not read a lot of that stuff, to be honest, and actually read stuff that I feel will, inform my mind in a different way that helps me understand the world in different ways. I think the work of there's a psychology professor, a moral psychologist at NYU called Jonathan Haidt. And he is most famous for his most recent book, which is called The Anxious Generation, which talks about, it sort of tracks teenagers' use of social media and mobile phones and correlates that with declines in mental health and that sort of thing. And read that if you like. His previous books, he's written, I think, 4 others, and they are amazing. So one's called The Happiness Hypothesis. It's all about kind of happiness. It's very, very good. The one that I really, really loved is called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And Haidt is a moral psychologist. And so he studies the way that we, think of and approach and apply morality. And he's got this amazing body of work that shows how people on the left and the right side of politics think very differently in terms of morality. Both sides think in very moral ways, right? So yes, you can point to people on either side that are, taking things too far or don't seem to be acting in a particularly wise or moralistic way, but actually largely both sides are trying to do what is right and adhere to some moral principles that are very important to them, but also to all of us. But they're very different. So the way that the right thinks about morality and the way that the left does is really, really different. And it's why we get to that point of division, because both sides are looking at the other side and going, how can you think that's the right thing to do? Because their moral kind of framework is quite different. And when you understand it, you can understand the other side and empathize with them much, much, much more. You go, okay, I get that. You're not doing that to be cruel or to be stupid or to be, whatever it is. You're doing that because your moral framework is this, and you're trying to do the right thing. And I think it's a really useful thing for anyone to read, because we do operate in a climate of a lot of partisan division, and we do tend to jump to conclusions about people on the other side of the political divide, being bad people or doing things that are amoral or not the right thing to be doing. So I think understanding why that is just, it's really helped me kind of understand the world around me and understand others and not be quite as judgmental about others. But also, if you're a marketer or an advertising person, like, you're marketing, you're not usually marketing to one side of the political divide. You've usually got to market to everyone. So it's really, really good fodder to help you understand how the human mind works outside of your own. So I'd really recommend that book, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. Have a look for that. It's a goodie.
Absolutely stunning. Well, look, there's a link in the show notes to that, to James's website as well. So if you want to reach out and get in touch with him, that is also in the show notes. All there is left for me to say is, James, thank you very much for your time tonight, this morning, whatever time it is when you're listening. Thank you.
You're welcome, Andy. Thanks for having me on. It's been really fun.